Red Dead Redemption is one of the highest profile games that has been stuck on 7th gen console hardware. Rockstar's Western epic released all the way back in 2010 on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, with no proper modern port or PC version to speak of. Over 13 years later, we're finally getting an updated release, but with some big caveats. The title is limited to PS4 and Nintendo Switch, and Rockstar hasn't revealed any obvious enhancements, suggesting the improvements might be fairly limited in scope. Today we'll be reviewing the new PS4 versions, while my colleague Tom Morgan will be taking a look at the game on Switch in the coming days. So does this new PS4 release have anything interesting to offer? And how does the PS4 Pro code hold up on the much more powerful PlayStation 5? Until now, the best way to enjoy Red Dead Redemption outside of PC emulation has been to play the game through backwards compatibility emulation on Xbox One consoles. The One X and Series X iteration of the game was particularly exciting, offering full 4K visuals that gave a pixel-precise rendition of Red Dead's graphics. But the bespoke PS4 version seems like it could offer more compelling visuals. So how does it stack up? The key improvement here comes down to image quality. Looking at the PS4 Pro code here running on a PS5 versus the Xbox backwards compatible version running on Series X, the PS5 image is substantially more stable. Fine geometric elements and foliage seem sharp and solid here, while Series X has an unstable resolve with obvious jagged edges. Initially, I suspected we were just looking at simple TAA on PS5, but the options menu indicates that FSR2 is actually in use here, AMD's popular temporal upsampling and anti-aliasing solution. The weird thing is that every shot on both PS4 Pro and PS5 seems to resolve to a full 4K resolution, meaning the FSR2 is providing anti-aliasing coverage without necessarily an upsampling performance benefit, as the game is already running at native resolution. There's a possibility dynamic res is in place, but I didn't spot any evidence of it in my testing. It's unusual for sure, but that seems to be the situation. As for the Series X, that version inherits the anti-aliasing method used on the 360 original, which was 2 times MSAA, and it also runs at a 3 times resolution scale on each axis to reach a native 4K. It still looks great, mind you, but there's some obvious jagged edges and additional shimmering on foliage elements. The PS5 simply looks smoother here. Curiously, the PS5 also includes a toggle to switch to FXAA, a post-process AA method. We see a lot more image breakup here, with near constant shimmering in general gameplay. Expect to see a lot of very rough edges, especially on buildings and other sharply angled geometry. The game is still rendering at native 4K, but the image treatment isn't nearly as good as the FSR2 that you'd otherwise be getting. Beyond image quality, the list of enhancements are quite sparse. Remember that the Series X here is just running the 360 code with a higher res, anisotropic filtering, and a negative LOD bias to enhance texture mipmaps. So our point of comparison here is really just the original game viewed through a cleaner lens. We probably should be getting some extra enhancements on PS5, but the improvements here are pretty meager. One more notch in favor of the PS5 comes down to shadow quality. The Series X version, just like the 360 original, has pretty messy shadows at a distance and rough-looking self-shadows for character models. Resolutions get boosted across the board on the new PlayStation version, with much higher res shadow maps in every scenario. I'm not sure this is a complete win though, because the combination of the higher resolution and the original game's shadow filtering gives the PS5 a bit of a harsh look in a lot of scenes. It's very clinical and precise, but looks rather hard-edged. Uniformly softer shadows would probably look more realistic, but I'd still score this as a win for Sony's machines. And the PS5 does have a slightly different gamma presentation relative to Series X. This looks like a remnant of the 360's system-level gamma tweaks, which often produced a punchier image on 360 hardware relative to the PS3. Your mileage may vary here in terms of preference, but the PS5's more neutral image preserves shadow detail before any TV processing, so I do tend to prefer that image. The rest of the game looks very much the same between the two consoles. Models still have a sharp, slightly blocky character with 7th gen polygon budgets. I couldn't make out any improvement in textures either, and the game still suffers from some very low-res artwork. This includes the main character, whose muddy face should have been a high priority to improve. LODs look about the same between the two releases, with grass extending far into the distance on both machines, but with some noticeable pop-in at times as well. That means the PS3 release's LOD compromises haven't migrated over to the updated PlayStation versions. I would have loved extra visual enhancements on PS4 and PS5 consoles, of course, but it really does seem limited to image quality and shadows. Unfortunately, that includes the game's UI. Red Dead Redemption still largely uses 720p UI elements, with no enhancement whatsoever for the vast majority of the interface. This was perfectly excusable on the backwards compatible Xbox versions, but it feels really egregious on the brand new PlayStation releases. The text and icons just look super muddy here, and don't scale well at all to a 4K set. The exception is the button icons, which do appear to have been redrawn at 4K. These feature much finer edges than on PS3, and lack this sort of crude, rustic look of the button icons on 7th gen consoles. It's perfectly fine, I suppose, but some of the character has definitely been lost in translation. It would have been great if the whole UI had been redrawn, but the button icons are sharp little circles against ugly backgrounds, slathered in scaling artifacts. I've been pitting the PS4 Pro code on PS5 against Series X so far to level the playing field as much as possible, but the weaker PlayStation systems also get good versions of Red Dead. The PS4 Pro is effectively identical to PS5, as you might expect, with nothing to differentiate it as far as I can tell. It includes options for FSR2 and FXAA and looks the same as PS5. That also means that the PS5 doesn't get any unique enhancements above and beyond the PS4 Pro, which is a disappointment. PS4 gets the exact same visuals as PS4 Pro and PS5, but this time rendered at a native 1080p. In the default FSR2 mode, it looks very smooth and sharp, with just a bit more aliasing than on the higher end machines. FXAA doesn't fare nearly as well, of course, especially at the slower resolution, and should be avoided. But the far more interesting comparison is to the existing 360 version running on Xbox One S. The original code is operating here without visual enhancements, so it's pegged to 720p with 2x MSAA, producing an artifact-ridden image. The PS4 with FSR2 by comparison looks so much smoother, and fine details resolve much more clearly. Texture detail also enjoys a better treatment thanks to good anisotropic filtering on PS4. It's a real night and day difference, and it makes the decision not to release this new version of Red Dead Redemption on Xbox look very strange. Why should Xbox owners have to play such a markedly inferior version of the same game? The Series S version is also a bit questionable. The 360 code also runs here under backwards compatibility, but this time with a 2x resolution boost on each axis instead of a 3x resolution boost, so it resolves to 1440p. The aliasing is pretty annoying here, and you do get the impression that the game would fare a lot better with the PlayStation version's FSR2, even if the raw rendering resolution remained the same. Performance in Red Dead across PS4 and PS5 consoles is very straightforward for the most part. The game operates with a 30fps framerate cap, and hits that target basically perfectly as far as I can tell. I didn't spot a single dropped frame while playing, and my performance capture didn't turn up any trouble spots either. Granted, I didn't have access to later game content, but the Undead Nightmare expansion is pretty explosive right out of the gate, and it ran flawlessly. Both FSR2 and FXAA seem to perform exactly the same here. That said, it's not a totally even 30fps output. Certain cutscenes on the new PlayStation versions operate with an animation pacing issue, where some animations will slow down for a few frames at a time. In practice, it looks like the game is constantly stuttering, at least when you have linear movement like a swooping camera pan, to make the inconsistency obvious. This doesn't apply to all cutscenes, but when it is present, it can be quite annoying. The Xbox versions of the game don't appear to suffer from this issue, thankfully. Curiously, this problem is quite similar to the animation issues that afflict the GTA 5 re-releases on current-gen and last-gen consoles. Plus, Red Dead Redemption operates without any significant form of motion blur, The edges of the screen are blurred very slightly during fast camera movements, but this is very difficult to notice while playing. Red Dead has a very staccato and slightly choppy feel while playing at 30 FPS here, which could have been mitigated by a high quality motion blur like we saw in its 2018 prequel. Red Dead Redemption is still a great looking game in a lot of respects. Its wide open plains and atmospheric lighting looked very impressive at the time of release and still hold up reasonably well in 2023. It's the kind of game that doesn't really need a major overhaul to work alright on modern systems, but even so, this is a very bare bones effort. There are no upgrades to textures or models, no high framerate option for PS5, the UI is still largely composed of 720p assets, there's no version of the updated game for Xbox consoles or PC, there's no new post-process effects, and the game now suffers from a significant animation issue during some cutscenes. It's far from the kind of premium remastering effort that this game deserves, especially at a $50 US asking price. I don't think the game needs a ton of work from a visual perspective, but a few key upgrades would go a long way. The lack of support for higher frame rates feels particularly egregious, as we know the Xbox 360 version of the game emulated on PC can hit 60 FPS with only very minor issues. To be fair, the introduction of FSR2 into these new versions does a lot for the game's image quality. Red Dead has the sort of smooth and clean resolve that the artwork was really begging for in earlier releases, and virtually all of the aliasing and high frequency detail is gone. It's a nice upgrade, and with similar attention in a few spots, this could have been a very decent remastering effort. Ultimately, the new PlayStation renditions of Red Dead Redemption are serviceable but very conservative updates of a classic game. It'll satisfy those who are keen to revisit Rockstar's Wild West epic, but the game deserved a more substantial upgrade. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content, and to get in touch, use Twitter. Thanks for watching.